So you've been with this data since the very beginning, ever since it was a wee little CSV. You were there to teach it the essential virtues in life, like moderation, especially when it comes to date formats. You were there as that data grew into information, to knowledge, to wisdom, to, dare I say, a fully grown viz. But now it's time to send that viz out into the world, but it needs a place to stay. And sure, you could build that viz a perfectly good server for it to live in, but it's ready to move out now. And frankly, you're kind of ready too. So you're looking at hosted options to house that viz, but you've got some questions. Is it safe? How well do the locks work? Is maintenance going to come barging in all the time? So, armed with your questions, you schedule a conference to come, to learn, to ask, and to see if you can trust that place to house your viz. And that, along with a few other slightly overextended metaphors, is what we're here to talk to you about today. So hi, I'm Braxton. I'm a senior security engineer on Tableau's product security team. I've been with Tableau for the last 5 years, the last 2 of which have been focused particularly on Tableau Online Security.
And I'm Anir. I'm a senior product manager working exclusively on Tableau Online. Braxton's got me beat by a little bit. I actually started early this year.
Very cool. So, before we get into this a little bit, I've been to a few conferences in my day, and I know it can be kind of distracting to like periscope your way through the talk, take pictures of slides. So, for your downloading and accessing pleasure, everything that we're going to cover today is up at that link. And if you miss your opportunity right now, it'll be at the end of the presentation. So, what we're going to do today is try to tease apart this kind of monolithic idea of Tableau Online and Tableau Online Security into 3 discrete layers of responsibility for security. We're going to talk a little bit about Amazon Web Services, why we built online on top of it, some of the security tools it affords us. We're going to talk about the infrastructure we've created to power online, how it works, how you might experience it, and a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, as well as some of the infrastructure security nerdery that I really get into. And we're also going to, we're not going to stop the story there. Layer 3 is really where you as a customer come in and you have the opportunity to dial in the security of your site to really meet your particular needs. And because we're very honored and humbled that you've survived a week of Vegas, a week of TC, and let's be honest, data night out, we want to leave some good time at the end for questions. We'd love to hear more from you. So, the second to last piece of administrivia before we get into it. There's an opportunity here to dive into some of the nuts and bolts, both of Amazon Web Services as well as Tableau Online. So we want to make sure that we're speaking the same language and we define some terms if that's needed. So, on the AWS side, can you raise your hand, keep it up, if you can spell AWS? Everyone here who's conscious is okay. Even my team, even better. All right, keep your hands up if you have launched an instance on AWS and Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud on the EC2. All right, keep your hands up if you have built some kind of a service on AWS, whether that's like a super fancy containerized microservice or a WordPress site. Okay, thanks, appreciate it. Now on the Tableau side, raise your hand if you have used Tableau at all. All right, very cool. Keep your hands up if you have published something to a Tableau server or Tableau Online. Awesome. All right, keep your hands up, sorry, if you have administered a Tableau Online site, had site admin permissions. Very cool. All right, cool, thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Anir, who's going to introduce you to the kind of silent partner of this presentation team. Talk a little bit about Bob.
So as part of my role at Tableau, I spend a lot of time talking to our larger customers on Tableau Online, people with hundreds of seats, thousands of seats, and tens of thousands of seats. We talk about what they need, some of the areas that they want to see improvement in, and all of the questions that they have. And as you can imagine, one of the big areas that we always dig into is security. So with that, let's introduce Bob. Not to be confused with a certain builder with the same name, Bob is planning a move to Tableau Online. And he already knows that Tableau Online really checks a lot of the boxes for his organization. He knows it's a lot like Server in the Cloud, except we do all the management. The performance, he's kicked off a trial, seeing that his visits load at great times, and he's really happy with the experience. But before he moves to Tableau Online, he wants to make sure that his data is secure. After all, Bob only gambles with his life, not with his data. So with Bob's company, most of his data is in HQ, right here in Las Vegas. He's also got some offices in the EU with some data that they also want to get up to Tableau Online. He comes to us, he asks us, hey, how are you going to keep all of this safe? How are you going to keep all of this secure? And we tell him, don't worry about it, we're good, and that's it. No, I'm just joking. We talk about a lot more than that, and we want to walk Bob through how we think about security here at Tableau. And the way we think about it is in the context of the shared responsibility model. Now, I promise this isn't something that Braxton and I just came up with last night during Data Night Out. It's actually a real thing. It's a framework that AWS builds. And it's something that we love here at Tableau, and we've extended, and it really frames how we think about security. So let's start with the first layer of this, AWS. They're responsible for security of the cloud. And really what they do is they have data centers all over the world, and they're managing hardware, the physical security of that hardware, and making sure the right people can get in and get out. And they're also the ones that build some of the core infrastructure that we use, from EC2 for our virtual machines to S3 for our storage. And then finally, they build a bunch of great security services that we're going to talk about later in this talk. And that second layer, that's all Tableau. That's Tableau Online. So when your users come in and they start exploring the website, they create visits, they publish to online, they're interacting with us from when they sign in to when they're actually sharing their data on online. And really, we're responsible for encrypting, making sure that data is safe, secure, and all of that. And finally, the last layer, Bob, the customer, you all, you're going to be responsible for what data gets on Tableau Online, and who has access to that data on Tableau Online, and what level of access they have on Tableau Online. We also expose a bunch of security knobs and configurations that we're going to talk about later in this talk that you'll have control over in terms of making your site safe, secure, and everything that you need. So let's start by talking a little bit more about AWS. If you didn't know how to spell AWS before, hopefully this slide gives you all you need.
Can't say you didn't learn anything.
And let's go ahead and start talking about AWS and a little bit about AWS security. Now, we're going to start all the way back when we first started Tableau Online. When we built it in 2013, we actually started it in our own data centers in Washington, near our headquarters in Seattle. And then we decided we would move over to a industry-leading platform, AWS, and let them handle the data centers and the hardware. And really, we did this for three big reasons. One, AWS is already available all over the world. So we wouldn't need to build new data centers or anything like that to be closer to our customers, closer to their data, and giving them a better experience. Next, we are wholly focused on giving you the best analytics experience possible. And we're going to let them handle everything related to the data center, everything related to the hardware, because that's not where our specialty is. We want to focus on our goal of making the best analytics experience possible. And finally, Braxton's going to dig into this pretty heavily later in our talk, but we use a bunch of great security services like CloudTrail and IAM to really enable and have a great security story for Tableau Online. Now, let's jump up a layer. Let's talk about Tableau. And what we're going to do here is start going into the architecture of Tableau Online. And if some of you guys mentioned you've administered a server or online, you might know a little bit about the architecture. And for others, it's going to be a little bit of a crash course in how Tableau Online works underneath. Now, Bob's a curious guy. He's got a lot of questions for us. He's got questions like, where's all my data on Tableau Online going to be? Where in the world will it live? I've got regulatory reasons, compliance reasons, or other reasons where I need to make sure I understand where my data is. And then, how does my data move around? Is it secure? Is it encrypted? And all of that. And finally, all of us have some old Oracle database, SQL Server that we're running on premises somewhere. What happens to that? How do I bring that data to online? And how do I keep that secure? So let's start by talking about where your data is. And really, the first core thing here is when you create your Tableau Online site, the first decision you'll make is where will my site live? And we've got 3 regions today: US West, US East, and Europe. And really, you're going to pick a point of delivery or a pod, which we refer to them as, on deciding exactly where your site lives. And they're spread across these 3 regions. And then when you pick that pod, that's where all of the data related to your site will be. All the activities your users are doing, all the data you store, all your visits, and then even anything we use underneath to back up your data, restore your data, all of that will live within that region. And the next thing down is you've created a site with us. There's a lot of customers creating sites with us. So how do we make sure that your data stays with your site and doesn't move to anyone else's site? And the key concept there is site-level isolation. So what we make sure is any data you have with your site or anything you're using with your site has a key and an identifier with your site ID. And that makes sure that anytime you're looking at your site, you're only seeing your own data and other people aren't ever going to get access to that data. One last thing I want to point out is we care a lot about availability. We care a lot about making sure Tableau Online is up all the time. So we have redundancy built in all of those regions. That's another thing AWS gives us with availability zones, if you're familiar with those. And that's how we can make sure we constantly stay up. If you go on trust.tableau.com today, you'll see that Tableau Online stays up through maintenance and all of that. And really, you barely ever see any downtime. Now, quick pop quiz on Bob. Some of you might remember Bob. So where do you think Bob should put his site? Do you think it should be in US East? Raise your hands if you think US East, US West. Some of you in Europe, maybe? So, like we said before, Bob should probably put his site in US West because his data is in Las Vegas, right, which is closest to the West region. Now let's go a level down and start talking about Tableau Online architecture. We're not going to talk about Kubernetes or containers, the exact services that build up Tableau Online. We're going to talk about this at a little bit of a higher level. We're going to talk in terms of workers. So there's 2 types of workers on Tableau Online: application workers and background workers. When you get on Tableau Online, start browsing content, looking through the website, and then even go into web authoring, what you're really doing is you're sending requests and getting responses from an application worker on our side. And then, for a lot of you familiar with server, if you set up subscriptions, if you set up extract refreshes, all of that is going through a background worker on Tableau Online. The next thing we're going to talk about is storage. And we use a lot of different storage technologies from AWS for our storage. We use RDS for Postgres. We use S3, we use Elastic Cache for caching, and a bunch of other services. But really what we want to make sure you understand is how we make sure that storage is secure. And the last piece, whenever you're talking about on-premises data, you're going to talk about Bridge and how Bridge stays secure and how it helps you connect your on-premises data to online. So let's start talking about a simple flow, something that you might do pretty often on Tableau Online. Well, let's say Bob wants to go ahead and do some web authoring. And he's going to connect over to a cloud database to do that. What happens? Well, first, he's going to build a connection to that cloud database. And we encourage him to use HTTPS and make sure that that connection goes over SSL so it's encrypted the entire time. After he's set up that connection, let's say Bob goes on Tableau Online, starts creating a workbook, connects over to that database, and then he drags a pill over to the main canvas. What happens then? Well, that drag and drop goes in the form of a request to an application worker on Tableau Online. And again, that communication happens over an encrypted channel, so you can make sure that no one else can see it, no one else can come between it. And then what that application worker does is decide, hey, I need to go over, get some data from the database, and bring that back in order to make this request happen. So it goes over, goes to the database, grabs what it needs, and then brings it back and sends it to Bob. And again, all of that is happening over an encrypted channel. Now, this was a little bit of a simpler scenario because we didn't have to actually store any of the data on Tableau Online. But the key thing here is all that communication happened over encrypted channels. And one last thing, that worker is actually running on an encrypted volume. So you can make sure everything's encrypted at rest as well. Now let's make this scenario a little bit more complicated. Let's talk about Bob's European team. Bob's European team wants to get some data available to Tableau Online, and those Americans, they really care about things being really fast and available all the time. So what they decide to do is they're going to set up a scheduled extract for that. What happens then? So let's say we set up that schedule for 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. When that time hits, what's going to happen is there's going to be a task that gets sent out to a background worker on Tableau Online. And then that background worker is going to go out to your cloud database, start issuing all the queries that it needs to build that extract, and get all that data back. And again, that part is happening through an encrypted connection. And then that extract gets built right on that background worker, and when it's ready, it takes that extract, puts it into a database, or puts it into a file store on Tableau Online. That file store is fully encrypted at rest, so that data always stays safe. Again, the key part of all of this, throughout that entire communication, we went through encrypted channels, encrypted workers, and stored the data in an encrypted at rest database. Now, for my last act, we're going to talk about on-premises data. What happens then? Well, if Bob Googles Tableau Online on-premises data, he's going to see something called Bridge. And what's Bridge? Bridge is something you actually run on your side, in your environment, to talk to your on-premises data. It can run in application mode or service mode on Windows. We encourage a lot of people to run it in service mode so you can set up schedules and it's connected all of the time. And what you do as a creator or an admin is you'll essentially just connect to Tableau Online using your username and password, and that's going to pair that bridge with your site on Tableau Online. And what this really does is it creates an encrypted WebSocket for us between Tableau Online and your environment. And now, whenever we need to issue live queries or whenever we need to set up an extract refresh, that's all going to go through that bridge. Let's talk about it a little bit more specifically. Let's say that you want to set up a scheduled extract using a bridge on Tableau Online. What happens? Well, really, this picture isn't a lot different than what you saw with the cloud database. What's going to happen now is Bob's going to set up a bridge in his environment, and then he's going to connect it over to his database. Again, we're going to set up a schedule. When it comes time, that bridge is going to start issuing all of the queries that it needs to the database, getting all the information back, and building an extract. And that extract's actually going to get built entirely locally on that bridge. And then when that extract is built, the bridge is going to send it over to a background worker on Tableau Online through an encrypted channel. This time, the background worker can be a little bit lazy. It already has the extract. All it does is take that extract, puts it into an encrypted database on Tableau Online. And again, even with on-premises data, all of the data was moved through secure encrypted channels. Now I'm going to pass it back to Braxton, who's going to talk about how his team makes sure that everything runs securely day to day on Tableau Online.
Great. Thanks, Adair. So now we're going to cover a little bit of what we do on the infrastructure side to protect the various pieces that we just covered. And the way I think about this is kind of as vegetable eating as a service. Now, looking at me, I'm sure some of you are thinking, that guy doesn't look like he eats a lot of vegetables. But I really do love the minutia of like securing services and doing things consistently and right at a fundamental level so that we can have a secure and great experience for Tableau Online. So these are things like server configs, patching, logging, monitoring, all the things that you have to do well and do consistently before you can really get to the business of analyzing your data and having a good time at that level. So this includes things like how our administrative teams, our operations teams access the environment. This is the multi-factor VPN that they have to access and the limited number of people that have that access, the justifications they have to give, and the regular reviews that occur to make sure that they still need that access. This is things like server configurations, where we use industry standard config management tools to go in and be very, very opinionated about each and every configuration file on our worker nodes and know what state it should be in. And that has really good benefits, both for the operation of the service, knowing that we have a uniform fleet, but it also has some benefits for security. Because if I know exactly what each file in the configuration of the box should be, and if that changes and it's changed by something that's not the config management tooling, that's interesting. So what we do in that case is we automatically revert it. We fire an alert to our operations team. They take a look, and if it looks like it's something that's potentially suspicious, they'll escalate it to my team on our incident response group, and we investigate that. Some really good signal when you get the basics dialed in. Additionally, we do things like patching. Not sexy by any means, but it's the stuff you've got to do. So we use that to define standards for patching SLAs based on severity, the coverage that we want to have, and then how we want to actually deploy those to maintain the availability of the service. There's things like logging. So we have a very specific logging configuration for each of the Linux servers that power Tableau Online that allows us to very fine-grained get an understanding of each of the actions that are taken at a service level and by our administrators, so we have a good record of what's going on. I don't know about you, but I love me some logging. I kind of look at it as like a text-based time machine to go back in time and understand exactly what was going on at a given point in time. So we got some tremendously powerful logging there to help us understand the environment. We do things like monitoring, both of the health of the service and looking for things like denial of service protection, making sure that we're responding to requests in a timely manner, and if we're not, that we're able to respond very, very quickly. I continue to not be able to get budget approval for bears for the security of Tableau Online, but stay tuned. I'm still working on it. Additionally, there are a number of AWS native tools, either that are security specific or they afford us some security properties. These are things like identity and access management, which is an AWS service that defines the users and roles in a given AWS account. So for Tableau Online, we define very specific identities for each of the instances or serverless framework, things like Lambda or containerized workflows. We can define this very particular identity for a given workload, and so that we know exactly what permissions it needs to have to do what it does. So if we have, for instance, like a deployment server, when we're deploying changes to online, we know that that class of hosts should be able to create some instances, should be able to stand up or down RDS databases, maybe pull some state from an S3 bucket, pull some configuration. What we're building there is kind of an implicit list of permissions that deployment server needs to have. And so that allows us to get very particular and opinionated again about what permissions that box should have. So in a given pod, there's about 15 of those unique roles that we enable to really allow us to do least privilege access at the resource level. Like I mentioned, in addition to the infrastructure level logging we do, we utilize services like CloudTrail. How many of y'all are familiar with CloudTrail? Got a few? All right, cool. So at a very high level, CloudTrail is a service that logs every API call against your AWS account. And if you've been around AWS for any amount of time, it's been drilled into your head that everything is an API call. So if you've got a service that logs every API call that's made and everything's an API call, you've got some really great insight into what's going on in your account. Again, for operational wins as well as for security. We also utilize things like VPC flow logs, which is kind of a NetFlow data stream that tells us network traffic in and out, what ports are being used, what hosts are involved, things like that. In addition to the alerting that we build around those data sources, there's a service called AWS Guard Duty, which allows you to bring in CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, and DNS requests that are made by servers in your environment. Mix that together with a little bit of machine learning. So I just said machine learning, so I want everybody to go, ooh.
Ooh.
It'll work. To really automatically profile expected behavior in a given AWS account. So if we know that Fred logs in and checks out how many instances we have to the AWS console, and then all of a sudden he starts doing different things, well, that's very interesting. We should look at that. It gives us some really good insight and some good sources of incidents. Additionally, we use AWS Patch Manager to orchestrate the patching that I just talked about. Allows us to get specific about the patching baselines at a host level, as well as the applying patches by the severity of them, things like that. So one question that I get every single time someone sends us questions that they have about the security of online is around encrypting data at rest. So one question we get is, do you encrypt EBS volumes, the hard drives effectively that are attached to instances? Do you encrypt those volumes in online? And I'm very, very happy to announce the boring answer to that question is now yes. There was a point in time in online's history where that answer was yes for new instance launches over the last certain amount of time. We had some infrastructure that we've since cycled, and we are now at a uniform 100% encrypted volume state, and we'll be there forevermore. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Additionally, to the constant kind of security that we've built into the platform itself, we want to do periodic assessments to make sure that we're doing the things that we expect. So we do kind of the classic yearly penetration test where we hire an outside company, we give them money, time, and a goal, and we say, hey, here's a couple new custom sites that we've created, see if you can access the data in one from the other. We've been running this test for the last number of years. Happy to report they've never been successful, but there's some tremendous value in understanding the vulnerabilities that they may discover along the way, as well as our own, it's a good test of our own internal tooling and detection tooling to know whether we're catching them poking around in our environment. Additionally, we do regular internal security assessments, which is just an in-house version of that penetration test. We do regular security reviews of major infrastructure changes, major features, and things that change the security model for online. What you see here on the right is a screenshot of a viz that we look at every single day that encapsulates the workflow of the security reviews that we run. Includes some of the next steps so that our engineers know what to do next, as well as some internal SLAs that we target. In addition to that, we also get to leverage the internet community of security researchers. We maintain a security@Tableau email address, and people that are interested in kind of improving the security of the internet at large occasionally send us reports of potential vulnerabilities that they've found. It's a really great source of information. We want to be accessible. And while we don't have a formal bug bounty program, we do want to make sure that they feel appreciated for the time that they've given. So we put together little care packages with some stuff from the Tableau Gear store, some mugs that I totally didn't steal from our kitchen with our logo on it. And we'll ship those out to places around the US, as well as places as far-flung as Colombia and Pakistan. So it's just really cool to see that kind of global community coming together. In addition to the periodic assessments we do ongoing things like static analysis of the source code that we write, looking for potentially insecure code paths, out-of-date third-party libraries. And like I mentioned with configuration management, we also heavily leverage infrastructure as code, which is a really fancy way of saying everything that makes up a Tableau Online pod is contained in text files that describe what it should look like. And as a security engineer that's maybe a little bit lazy and doesn't want to have to go poke around and talk to everybody about what's going on in online, if I know exactly what the state of Tableau Online is and what resources should be there, I can apply some security math on top of that and fix issues before they even see the light of prod. Some really cool opportunities there. So we also do continuous external vulnerability scanning of our web application. We do some internal vulnerability scanning of the underlying infrastructure as well, just to make sure that our patch management is doing a good job, as well as to ensure that we're prioritizing the things that they find. And so not only do we want to do periodic assessments and ongoing ones, we also want to be able to prove it to ourselves and to you as our customers. So some key outputs of this process is that Tableau maintains a SOC 2 program covering the security and availability of Tableau Online as a service. The output of that is something called a SOC 2 Type 2 report, which details the activities that are undertaken to prove and demonstrate the security of online to our external auditors. If you have an NDA and/or an account rep with us, you can get access to that report. If you're not ready for that level of commitment, we have a SOC 3 report on our tableau.com/security page. We can freely download a high-level summary of that document. Additionally, we generate reports from our external vulnerability scans and from the penetration tests that we run. so that you can get a report of the number and severity of the findings that those activities generate, kind of make some decisions for yourself about the security posture of online. And for those of you in the crowd, and I know there's some of you, that have a wonderful and long list of security questions, your favorite spreadsheet that you like to bring to vendors about the security posture that they have, we have pre-filled out something called the Cloud Security Alliance's self-assessment form, which has all the questions you had and some you didn't even know you had wanted to ask about the security of online for your reading and pleasure. And it's a good opportunity both for you to understand or maybe to help ease the minds of your information security teams about what we're doing on online. And so, like I mentioned, the party doesn't stop here. At the third layer, what we have are the things that you as a customer are responsible for. So I obviously have strong opinions about the way certain things should be managed, but there are certain things that really only make sense for you as a customer to define. So we're going to go over kind of a high-level just starting point, and then some of my favorite security knobs in a given online site. So first up, if you have no idea what you're doing with Tableau Online Security and you're really starting from scratch, one thing that's interesting for those of you that didn't believe me that I love minutia and I love the gory details, is if you go to our Tableau Security website, you download that SOC 3 report. At the very end of the doc, if you make it all the way there, you will find a section called Complementary User Entity Controls, which, if you're still awake after hearing that phrase, is basically a demarcation point between what we as Tableau provide and what you as the customer are responsible for. So if you're really not sure where to start, I would go through that list and make sure you have an answer for each of those questions. So on to some of my favorite site security settings. Authentication, near and dear to my heart. But I believe strongly that authentication is a dish best served outsourced. We maintain Tableau ID, which is a really great customer identity tool. Allows you to access the community portal, the Tableau Online Sites, as well as the conference app that you're using today. But Tableau's first priority is always going to be the generating and creating the world's best data analysis platform. And there are other companies whose mission in life is to create the world's best access and identity management platform on the planet. So I'd highly encourage you to look at some of those. Things like Okta, Ping, Azure AD. Those services we all have documented integrations for so that you can use your existing corporate account to access your online site. And that's going to be a great place for you to get really opinionated about what networks people access your online site from, what multi-factor authentication should be in place, things like that. Additionally, there's a feature called SCIM, which is a slightly contorted acronym that basically means automated user provisioning and deprovisioning, that we've been testing in our own internal online site with around 1,500 users. It's been working really well, and we're in the process of releasing that to GA. Highly encourage you to check that out when it drops. So additionally, we talked a little bit about logging and the wonderfulness that is. The version of that we offer within Tableau Online Sites is something called Admin Insights. I'd highly encourage you to enable this for your site, even if you don't think you have an immediate need for it. What this is going to do is going to take the historical events that are happening within your online site, and it's going to pipe that in as a data source to a project in your site. That's going to get really good fine-grained access to, or fine-grained auditing of what users are doing in your site, what they're accessing, things like that. So I highly encourage you to turn that on. And then we'll talk a little bit about a talk later this afternoon that's going to dive into some of that data. Last but not least on the top 3 list is security around extensions. So dashboard extensions are an incredibly powerful tool to leverage external services to enrich your dashboards. But as part of providing that power, it's kind of a necessarily pointy tool. So it potentially has access to the data on your dashboard, or at least to change what's being displayed, which is a fairly powerful tool. So I'd highly encourage you to have some governance around which extensions are allowed and then what permission they're being given. You can give them full access to everything that's on a given dashboard, as well as you can prompt the user before they're enabled. So I'd encourage you to look at that. Last but not least, we've got kind of a grab bag of some things to look at really quickly. Support access is a great way to get some help as you're spinning up in your Tableau Online site. It's a way to publish a named user that you can view and assign permissions to within your site. Support access is off by default, but if you've enabled it for a support case in the past and you don't currently have a need, just as kind of a least privilege play, I'd encourage you to disable that. Similarly, on the least privilege side of things is data source security. This isn't a whole lot different than on-prem data source access that you may need to manage. But an example of that being a screenshot from my personal Tableau Online site where I'm about to give it access to some spreadsheets in my Google Drive account. What you'll see here, oh, and I've got a laser pointer, look at that. Is that you're giving Tableau the ability to see and download all of your data in Google Drive. So we've looked at the APIs that Google affords us, and this gives us read-only access to the files in those Google Drive shares, but that's still a lot of permissions. And so what I've done in my site is I've created a separate Tableau at mydomain.com user, so that when I want to share a spreadsheet with Tableau Online for visualizing, I just share it with that account. And there we go. It's a nice way to just kind of limit what we call the blast radius of data access here. So additionally, Anir covered Bridge really well. Highly encourage you to do limited access to the service accounts that you use to enable Bridge for your sites. But Bridge as a design pattern is great. It avoids unnecessary firewall poking, which I'm a fan of. And then we have some knobs around whether you want to enable mobile access to your site. And we've worked with a number of mobile device management tools to make sure that that's a good experience. So I'm going to hand it over to Anir to talk about what we've learned.
Thanks, Braxton. So as we talked about today, there's a lot of different parts of the puzzle, a lot of different layers to make sure that Tableau Online is secure. And it's a great place for you to put your data and your viz and all of that. First, there's AWS that's focused at the hardware level, the data centers, and giving us all these security tools we use. And then Tableau, we're responsible for encrypting all the things. Braxton's team's here looking and making sure that everything is running securely and we're doing the proper security reviews. And then you, the customer, Bob, making sure that you outsource the authentication piece, making sure that the right level of people and have the right level of access to Tableau Online to the right data. Then finally, you're making sure you're tracking what's happening with your sites, with admin insights, and looking at all of the different activities people are doing. I want to thank you all for coming out this Friday, listening to us talk about Tableau Online Security. Just a quick little note of some other things. There's a security meetup happening right after this, and there's also a great talk on Tableau Online Admin Insights happening this afternoon. We'd encourage you to check it out. If you download the slides, we have some other appendix with some more information that you can look at here as well.